Good morning, respected Dr. Sanjay Basar, Dr. Hemant Malhotra, Dr. Jaiswal, all dignitaries, and my fellow colleagues and students. Today's CCR is going to be presented by the Dr. Prachi Jafar and with her fellow colleagues. Let me introduce my department. My department comprises of myself, working as a head, respiratory medicine, Dr. Lokeshman, professor, Dr. Jitendra, Dr. Samiksha, and Dr. Anugya are my fellow faculties of the departments. This is my department photograph comprising of resident and our faculties. Department established with the Assessment College in 2000. And the first MD seat was allotted by NMC in way back 2009. It was increased from 1 to 2 in 2012. Then it is current intake is 5 per year since 2020. Now we are having 5 resident per year since 2020. These are some of our IP OPD data, which are fairly satisfactory. And what we do procedure in our department, we do bronchial lavage, we do transbronchial needle aspiration. Now we do endobronchial biopsy, we do transbronchial lung biopsy, we do whole lung lavage, we do airway statting also, we do airway dilatation, benign and malignant, we do endobronchial bronchopleural fistula closure also. Now we have also have a endobronchial ultrasound, which is a recent modality. Was introduced in India 2013. Now we have endobronchial ultrasound since 1 year. In endobronchial ultrasound, we do ultrasound guided mediastinal lymph node aspiration. We have done around 80 endobronchial ultrasound in the last 1 year since the instruments were introduced in our department. We also do medical thoracoscopy that we do under local anesthesia. It is done for the undiagnosed pleural effusion. It is done for the undiagnosed pleural effusion. Sometimes it is done for the multilocalated pleural effusion. As you can see, the video septa is being broken. We also do pleurodosis. We also do all kind of lung procedures, lung FNHC, lung biopsy, thrombosynthesis, intercostal tube insertion, and percutaneous lung biopsy also. We also do skin prick test. We also do immunotherapy for the allergic disorders. We also do routine lung function tests with DLCO and spirometry. And what our future plan? Future plan is development of rigid bronchoscopy unit, development of Center for Excellence for Allergy, Asthma, Immunology, or development of Center for Excellence for Interventional Pulmonology. Although we do almost all the procedure, but few procedures still we are not able to do it because of lack of some equipment like cryo and cautery, APC, and navigational bronchoscopy, etc. So I hope we in future, near future, we will be able to execute it also. Now I request Dr. Prachi. Okay. As far as sorry for that. As far as research is concerned, we do also a lot of publication. Last 5 years we have done 50 publication in various index journals. We do a lot of academic activity also. This year we do two major activity. One is last month we conducted for the postgraduate student. Around 130 people attended all over the Rajasthan. That program. Before last month we conducted sleep workshop in our institute. So we do also a regular teaching program for the postgraduate student also. Around 4 to 5 week classes per week we do. Our faculty participate in regular conferences, national and internationals. Now I request Dr. Prachi to present today's case. It's a very interesting case.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, all dignified faculties and my dear colleagues. Today, I'll be presenting a case of a 21-year-old male with fever and diminution in vision. A 21-year-old male resident of Jaipur, second-year engineering student at BITS Goa, presented with chief complaints of cough, fever, and diminution of vision since last 20 days. The history of present illness. Patient was apparently normal since 20 days ago, after which he started complaining of cough, which was insidious and non-progressive in onset. In nature, the cough was dry and it was increased in the evening time. There were no aggravating factors associated. It was not associated with any audible wheeze, nasal symptoms like sneezing or nasal discharge. There was no postural variation, and it was not associated with any breathlessness, chest pain, or hemoptysis. The patient also complained of diminution of vision since last 20 days, which was gradual, painless, progressive diminution of vision in bilateral eyes. It was not associated with any redness, discharge, or ocular pain, and as well, no history of ocular trauma. The patient also had fever since last 20 days, which was insidious in onset. It was low grade, intermittent in nature, and associated with evening rise of temperature. It was not associated with chills, rigors, night sweats, myalgia, joint pain, or rash, and was relieved with medication. The negative history of the patient was as follows. There was no history of hemoptysis, wheeze, chest pain, palpitation, or syncope. No, there was no history of orthopnea, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, or pedal edema. No history of weight loss or loss of appetite was present. There was no history of recurrent respiratory tract infections since childhood or history of any joint pains and any skin lesions. The past history was insignificant apart from he had a COVID-19 infection in 2022, which was mild and managed at home. General physical examination. The patient was well oriented to time, place, and person at the time of the general physical examination. His weight was 76 kgs, height was 180 centimeters, and a BMI of 23.5 kg per meter square, which was within normal limits. The patient did not have any pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, lymphadenopathy, or edema. The vitals were unremarkable except he had a fever of 37.7 degrees Celsius. Respiratory system examination. Inspection. The chest movements were equal bilaterally. Chest wall was bilaterally symmetrical and elliptical in shape. Trachea was central in location. The apex beat was seen in the fifth intercostal space, just medial to left midclavicular line. The vertebra was central with no visible deformities. There were no scars, sinuses, visible pulsations, or dilated veins over the skin. All the findings of inspection were confirmed by palpation. Apex beat was palpated at the fifth intercostal space, just medial to left midclavicular line. The anterior-posterior diameter of the patient was 20 cm. The transverse diameter was 32 cm, and the AP is to transverse ratio was 5:8, which confirmed that the shape of the chest was elliptical. The chest circumference on inspiration was 97 cm, and on expiration it was 92 cm. Tactile vocal fremitus was equal on all areas of the chest. On percussion, first direct percussion, it was resonant on both sides over the clavicle. Comparative percussion, which was resonant on both the sides. Topographic percussion, position of the liver was in the 5th, 7th, and 9th intercostal space in mid-clavicular line, mid-axillary line, and posterior scapular line. Cardiac border was consistent with the normal anatomical position. On Raynaud and on tidal percussion, it was normal as well. On auscultation, normal vesicular breath sounds in bilateral lung beats of equal intensity were heard. Bilateral vocal resonance was equal, and there were no adventitious sounds heard. The systemic examination was unremarkable. So let's review the clinical history of the patient till now. So now we have a 21-year-old male engineering student with symptoms lasting 20 days of dry cough, low-grade intermittent fever, and progressive painless diminution of vision in bilateral eyes. His history was insignificant, except he had the COVID-19 infection in 2020. General examination was unremarkable, except he had a fever of 37.7 degrees Celsius. His systemic examination was unremarkable as well. What do you think should be the next line of investigation?
Any medicine residents that you know, in addition to routine investigations, what else should be done in this surgery?
Eye examination.
So that will be discussed later. So firstly, we requested for a chest X-ray for the patient. Here we can see an apparently normal chest X-ray. But if we look closely, we can see on the first image, the chest X-ray, the normal shape of the hilum is a concave shape. And in this chest X-ray, if we look closely, the shape of the hilum is concave shape. So we can think of a hilar pathology. And the differentials that we could make after till now are tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, vascular pathology, autoimmune disorder, and mitotic pathology. Then we proceeded on to requesting routine investigations for the patient. The ESR of the patient was raised, which was 40 mm per hour. RBS and serum calcium were normal. HIV status was non-reactive, and the strongly positive Montoux test was present with more than 15 mm in duration. All the rest of the routine investigations like complete blood count, liver function test, renal function test, and serum electrolytes were normal. The key investigative updates of the patient till now are: in the routine investigation, the ESR was raised, Montoux test was strongly positive, rest all routine investigations were unremarkable. And the differential considered right now are tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, lymphoma, autoimmune or vascular pathology. So to rule out vascular and autoimmune pathologies, we did a few additional investigations like ANA screening, CNCA, PNCA, and anti-CCP IgG, which were negative. CRP quantitative was slightly raised, and ACE was raised with a level of 100 unit per liter. Next, we requested for an ophthalmological examination for the patient and requested for a CCT chest, which will be discussed by Dr. Mansi from Department of Radiology and Dr. Ishita from the Department of Ophthalmology.
Thank you, Dr. Prachi. Good morning, respected dignitaries, faculty members, and my fellow colleagues. I'm Dr. Mansi Shokli, first year radiology resident, and I'll be taking the case further. As requested by the Department of Respiratory Medicine, a contrast enhanced CT chest was done, and the findings were as follows. The CECT chest shows a large, well defined mass lesion with smooth margins, showing mild homogeneous enhancement with no internal necrosis and calcification, with largest measuring approximately 4 into 5 into 8 centimeters in the subcarinal region. Few other lymph nodes were also seen, which were less than 10 mm in short axis diameter, and there was no pleural effusion as well. This is the axial lung window section. The lung parenchyma was unremarkable, except for a small nodule which was seen in the right lower lung lobe, which was probably of an inflammatory etiology. The differentials that we kept was sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, and lymphoma. Sarcoidosis was kept as the first differential because there was no necrosis or internal necrosis or calcification that was seen. Also, lymphoma was also considered, but it shows more enhancement, and biopsy was advised for further evaluation. Though we did not rule out any one of these through CECT, and we kept all of them as our differentials. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mansi. Good morning, respected faculty and fellow residents. I, Dr. Ishita Rungta, second year resident from the Department of Ophthalmology, will be further discussing the case under the guidance of Dr. Chaitanya Gupta, sir. A 21-year-old male was referred to us from the Department of Respiratory Medicine in view of diminution of vision. On eliciting history from the patient, he reported a gradual, painless, progressive diminution of vision in both eyes, which was more marked in the left eye than the right eye. And he specifically gave history that the vision was decreased in the sides while looking straight ahead. Duration of the history was for the past 20 days. Diminution of vision was not associated with redness, discharge, or ocular pain. There was no complaint of any floaters, flashes, or photophobia, and there was no history of any ocular trauma or any prior ocular disease. The patient was not a known case of any chronic illnesses. On ocular examination, visual acuity was decreased in both eyes. It was 6.9 in the right eye and 6.60 in the left eye. On refraction, best corrected visual acuity was obtained to 6.6 in the right eye and 6.12 in the left eye. Intraocular pressures were normal. Pupillary reaction was brisk both in the direct and consensual pathways and round and regular in shape. Color vision and extraocular movements were both normal. On slit lamp examination, we found that the eyelids, conjunctiva, cornea, anterior chamber, iris, and lens of both eyes were normal. Due to the history of decreased peripheral vision, a confrontation test was performed. The patient was sat 1 meter away from the examiner and his left eye was occluded while the examiner occluded their right eye. The patient is asked to look directly at the examiner's eye and each quadrant is tested in the patient's field vision by having them state when the fingers are visible. The test is then repeated in the other eye. On examination, we noted that while the patient could see movements in the nasal quadrants, the vision in the temporal quadrants were not so clear. Thus, we suspected a field effect and a perimetry test was performed for the patient. In this report, we can see that there are dark regions. These dark regions depict a loss of vision in the temporal visual fields of both the eyes. A dilated fundus examination was then done for further evaluation. As we can see in this fundus camera image, in both eyes, the media is clear, disc margins are normal, cup disc ratio is about 0.4:1, vessels are normal, and there is a normal foveal reflex. So what is this loss of temporal fields that we see in perimetry? The full visual field can be divided into a left and a right hemifield. Both eyes contribute equally to viewing these regions. The nasal retina of the left eye and the temporal retina of the right eye view the left hemifield, while the nasal retina of the right eye and the temporal retina of the left eye view the left hemifield. The fibers from the retina form the optic nerve, which continue to the optic chiasma. From there, the fibers pass into the optic tracts and relay into the lateral geniculate body. This pathway then continues through the optical radiations and finally terminate in the primary visual cortex of the occipital lobe. As we can see in this diagram, at the optic chiasma, the nasal retinal fibers decussate while the temporal fibers remain uncrossed. Thus, a lesion at the optic chiasma selectively damages the crossing nasal fibers, resulting in the loss of temporal visual fields of both eyes, and we describe this as bitemporal hemianopia. Now, what are the possible differentials of optic chiasmal lesion? The most common differential are tumors, any cellular tumors like pituitary adenoma or any third ventricular gliomas, craniopharyngiomas, or non-neoplastic masses like anterior communicating artery aneurysms. These are all the common causes. But there are rare differentials as well that include trauma, inflammation due to sarcoidosis and tuberculosis, demyelinating disorders like multiple sclerosis, radiation-induced necrosis, toxicity, and vasculitis. We advise a CECT head and an MRI brain in view of the median pattern of field loss, as we suspect that the cause was neurological. I would now like to invite Dr. Mansi to discuss the MRI and CECT. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ishita. As requested by the Department of Ophthalmology, CECT head and MR brain was done. The findings were as follows. So this is a contrast enhanced CT scan which shows axial and sagittal section, in which we can see the enlargement of the pituitary gland for age and gender. The mid-sagittal height was 12 mm. It is showing homogeneous enhancement with no definite focal lesion. The sella is normal in size with no definite evidence of any bony erosion or destruction. So these findings were suggestive of a small pituitary microadenoma, and for further investigations, an MR contrast study was advised. MRI sella with contrast was done. So these are the T1 weighted sagittal sections. The image on the left shows a normal pituitary gland with the anterior pituitary appearing iso-intense to the cortex, and the posterior pituitary gland is significantly bright. The pituitary stalk is normal in the thickness and shows smooth distal tapering. The optic chiasma is normal. Whereas we can see in the patient, the pituitary gland is enlarged, which is extending into the suprasellar region with indentation over the optic chiasma with loss of posterior pituitary hyperintensity. The stalk is thickened with loss of distal tapering. The sella is normal in size. These are the T2 weighted coronal section. On the left, we can see normal scan. The pituitary gland in the patient is asymmetrically enlarged, left more than the right. The enlarged pituitary gland is seen encroaching in the suprasellar region and is indenting and displacing the optic chiasma superiorly, particularly in the left half, with no significant paracellar extension. Yes, sir. The pituitary gland is enlarged and the suprasellar extension can be seen, which is displacing the optic chiasma over here. Whereas the lesion is homogeneous in signal intensity with no obvious focal cystic or hemorrhagic lesion seen on T2 weighted images. These are the T2 weighted sagittal section, and here I put this as a reference image on the left that shows that how a normal pituitary stalk looks like. This is the normal pituitary stalk with distal tapering, and we can see the hyperintensity in the infundibular recess with the normal pituitary gland, where we can see, like in our case, the patient has a significantly enlarged pituitary gland with convex superior margins extending into the suprasellar region, indenting and displacing the optic chiasma. The stalk is thickened with loss of distal tapering. These are the T1 weighted post-contrast coronal section, and these are the contrast images on how a normal scan looks like, where we can see, like in the patient, the pituitary gland shows marginally heterogeneous enhancement with no focal lesion or necrotic area, which is seen. So we considered granulomatous hypophysitis as our primary diagnosis. We ruled out pituitary adenoma because there was no definite focal lesion. The stalk was also involved and absent of posterior pituitary T1 hyperintensity. The size of the sella was normal with no erosion of the dorsum sellae. There was no cystic or hemorrhagic area with no obvious paracellar involvement. So we considered granulomatous hypophysitis as our first differential. To summarize, like all the radiological findings, our first differential was sarcoidosis in view of absence of necrotic ring enhancing lesion in the pituitary gland or absence of any significant necrosis in the lymph nodal mass as well. The lymphoma could also be a possibility, but the intracranial involvement in lymphoma are usually multiple rather than the solitary involvement of pituitary gland, which is usually diffuse. So we kept as granulomatous hypophysitis as our first differential. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mansi. Now, let's take a recap of all the imagings done till now. The chest X-ray and CT chest showed a mediastinal lymphadenopathy. CCT head and MRI brain were suggestive of pituitary hypophysitis, and the status of the patient right now was a radiological diagnosis of pituitary hypophysitis was made, and the cause was under evaluation. To further evaluate the causes of pituitary hypophysitis and the endocrinological status of the patient, I would like to invite Dr. Sumega Singh from the Department of Endocrinology.
Thank you, Dr. Prachi. Good morning to all the respected dignitaries, faculty members and colleagues. I am Dr. Sumega, first year DM resident from the Department of Endocrinology and will be taking the case forward under the guidance of Dr. Rajiv Kasliwal. This patient initially presented with symptoms of fever and cough, but the more concerning feature was the progressive painless loss of vision, predominantly on the left. The peripheral vision loss on central gaze suggested a chiasmal compression. MRI confirmed suspicion of pituitary hypophysitis, prompting us to proceed with a comprehensive hormonal evaluation to assess the pituitary function. Now, the hormonal profile is striking. Cortisol is profoundly low, reflecting secondary adrenal insufficiency. Both free T4 and TSH are suppressed, indicating central hypothyroidism. LH and testosterone are also very low, pointing towards hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. Together, this constellation confirms panhypopituitarism secondary to pituitary hypophysitis. Now, this table summarizes clinical features and hormonal abnormalities in different subtypes of hypophysitis. Adenohypophysitis, it is the most common form. It presents mainly with headache and visual disturbances due to mass effect. And in hormonal deficiencies, ACTH deficiency, TSH and FSH, LH deficiency are more common. ADH deficiency is quite rare. In infundibular neurohypophysitis, predominantly posterior pituitary involvement is seen. Nearly all present with polydipsia, polyuria from central diabetes insipidus. ADH deficiency is almost universal. The anterior pituitary hormone deficiencies are rare. Mass effect symptoms like headache and visual loss are also very uncommon. So after endocrinology evaluation, the diagnosis came out to be secondary anterior pituitary hypophysitis with panhypopituitarism with mediastinal lymphadenopathy under evaluation. Now, the diseases associated with enlarged infundibular stalk, which was seen in the MRI sella with contrast. The differentials could be germinoma, craniopharyngioma, granulomatous diseases like Langerhans cell histiocytosis, sarcoidosis, granulomatosis with polyangiitis, tuberculosis, or lymphocytic infundibular hypophysitis. Now, after completing the hormonal evaluation and following a detailed discussion with the radiology department regarding the MRI sella findings, the working diagnosis of hypophysitis was made. Now, hypophysitis can present as an isolated entity or it can be a component of a systemic disease. So, given this differential, to evaluate an underlying systemic etiology, a whole body FDG PET scan was requested. And I would like to invite Dr. Lakshmi from the Department of Nuclear Medicine to discuss about the findings of FDG PET scan.
Thank you, Dr. Sumika. Good morning, respected dignitaries, faculties, and my dear colleagues. I am Lakshmi Tulsi from the Department of Nuclear Medicine. The patient was referred to the Department of Nuclear Medicine for a whole body FDG PET-CT scan. This is the MIP image of the FDG PET-CT showing physiological tracer uptake in the brain, myocardium, liver, and spleen with the diffuse inhomogeneous FDG uptake in the bilateral cervical, supraclavicular, axillary, bilateral paravertebral, and bilateral suprarenal regions due to brown fat uptake. This MIP image also shows abnormal tracer uptake in the mediastinal regions at the along with the large abnormal area of FDG uptake in the right paramedian location of mid-thoracic region. These are the corresponding axial and the coronal fused PET-CT and CT images showing multiple discrete and confluent lymph nodes at the bilateral paratracheal and the larger lymph nodal mass region at the subcarinal region and paraesophageal location, measuring around 4.0 by 5.0 by 8.0 centimeters with a SUV max of 19.7. There is no appreciable necrotic component within the lymph nodal mass region. Now these are the axial images of fused PET-CT and CT images showing of brain showing soft tissue density lesion at the suprasellar location, which is inseparable from the pituitary gland. Coming to summarize the case, FDG with multiple discrete and confluent mediastinal lymph nodes with FDG with soft tissue density lesion in the suprasellar location, which is inseparable from the pituitary gland. Based on these findings, the differential diagnosis could be the granulomatous disease, tuberculosis or sarcoidosis, and lymphoma. Now I would like to invite Dr. Prachi from the Department of Pulmonary Medicine to further continue the discussion.
So to summarize the presentation till now, we have a 21-year-old male with complaints of cough, low-grade fever and progressive bilateral visual loss since last 20 days. The general physical examination of the patient was unremarkable except a fever. The routine tests were all normal except an raised ESR and a strongly positive Montux test and HIV negative. The CECT chest of the patient suggested a mediastinal lymphadenopathy, and the CECT head and MRI brain suggested a pituitary hypophysitis. The endocrinological workup came up with a diagnosis of panhypopituitarism due to secondary hypophysitis, and the PET-CT suggested of a diagnosis of a TB, sarcoidosis, or lymphoma. Furthermore, we did a video bronchoscopy of the patient to derive a tissue diagnosis and to evaluate the endobronchial status of the patient. Here we can see the video of the video bronchoscopy where all the anatomical findings were normal except a slight bulging of at the carina, and the TBNA sample from the subcarinal blind TBNA sample from subcarinal lymph node was taken, and the results of the bronchoscopic sampling was as follows. Ball cell block was negative for any granuloma, necrosis, giant cells, or any malignant cells. Ball gene expert for MTB was negative. TBNA cytopathology and endobronchial biopsy were all inconclusive. We also requested for a Ball CD4 is to CD8 count, which came out to be negative within normal limits, that was 0.3. Furthermore, let's summarize the investigative history of the patient till now. The CT chest suggestive of mediastinal lymphadenopathy, brain imaging suggestive of pituitary hypophysitis, endocrine diagnosis was panhypopituitarism due to secondary hypophysitis, PET CT suggestive of mediastinal lymph nodes and a suprasellar lesion with possibility of TB, sarcoidosis or lymphoma, and the bronchoscopy was NAD with Ball and TBNA samples inconclusive. What do you think could be the further line of investigation for coming up with a diagnosis for the patient? So the further line of investigations that we had were EBUS or EUS guided TBNA, CT or PET guided biopsy, or mediastinoscopy. The ideal investigation was EBUS, but at the time the patient presented to us, EBUS was not present at a tertiary care center, so we opted for a PET guided biopsy. For the further discussing the biopsy, I would like to invite Dr. Lakshmi Tulsi from Nuclear Medicine Department.
Thank you, Dr. Prachi. The patient was referred to the Department of Nuclear Medicine for PET-guided biopsy. After matching the referral criteria for PET-guided biopsy and in view of failure of bronchoscopic guided biopsy, we performed a biopsy from the subcarinal lymph nodal mass. During the procedure, the patient was lying in the prone position and the biopsy needle was inserted to the right paravertebral region. Adequate sampling has been taken and sent to the oncopathology department. We have performed more than 1500 PET guided biopsy at our site. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Kusha Sharma from the Department of Oncopathology to discuss the histopathological findings.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi. Good morning, respected faculty and colleagues. I'll be discussing the histopathological aspects of this case. We received a PET CT guided biopsy from the subcarinal lymph node. Histopathological examination at lobar revealed multiple discrete non-necrotizing granulomas. This is the higher magnification of the granuloma, which is showing you clusters of epithelioid cells which are cuffed by lymphocytes. So a final impression of non-necrotizing granulomatous lymphadenitis was given, and a gene expert was advised to rule out the possibility of tuberculosis. Now I would like to request Dr. Prachi to take further the case.
To further achieve a microbiological tissue diagnosis, we send the core biopsy of the subcarinal lymph node for a AFB gene expert, which came out to be negative, and an AFB MGIT culture, which was negative as well. So till now, there was a dilemma over the diagnosis even after near complete workup of the patient. Important issue here was a young male with secondary hypophysitis causing optic chiasmal compression and panhypopituitarism along with mediastinal lymphadenopathy with an elusive diagnosis. A multidisciplinary board sat and discussed for the further management of the patient and the treatment plan was made. The team reached a consensus on the most appropriate line of treatment, underscoring the importance of collaborative decision making, optimizing patient care. Approach to diagnosis and rationale. Pituitary tuberculosis is extremely rare and considered a sporadic manifestation of CNS tuberculosis, and there is no specific standard guidelines that exist for its management. Considering the pressure effects of a cellular space occupying lesion, treatment was tailored on the lines of CNS TB protocols. Firstly, we gave the patient antitubercular therapy, which was initiated by standard 4 first-line drug ATT regimen, that is isoniazid, rifampicin, ethambutol, or pyrazinamide. Steroids were given concomitantly to reduce the mass effect and perilesional edema, optic chiasmal compression symptoms, and pituitary inflammation. Gradual tapering was planned to prevent rebound inflammation. Steroid therapy acted as a crucial adjunct in preventing acute neurological and endocrinological deterioration. To replace the endocrinological hormones, levothyroxine was given, and testosterone replacement was planned to be initiated once patient was stabilized on ATT and thyroxine. The key message here in the deciding the treatment of the patient was this patient was managed as a case of CNS tuberculosis with pituitary involvement, a rare sporadic presentation. The integration of ATT, judicious steroid use, and the endocrine replacement formed the cornerstone of the therapy, and the ATT was continued for 12 months. Now, for the follow up of the clinical course of the patient. The fever and cough showed gradual improvement with complete resolution within 2 to 3 weeks of the therapy, which is considered an early clinical response. For the ophthalmological response, visual diminution improved progressively and resolved fully by the 8th week of the treatment. Overall, the clinical course reflected a steady and favorable response to ATT without evidence of relapse or any complications. Moving on to the PET-CT whole body pre and post treatment, here we can see the subcarinal lymph nodal uptake of the patient post therapy has decreased and almost disappeared, and the uptake of the pituitary has also disappeared. Here we can see MRI brain pre and post treatment. The size of the pituitary and the stalk enlargement has reduced as well. Moving on to the hormonal evaluation of patient pre-treatment and post-treatment, except the FT3, all the hormonal levels came back to normal levels after 2 months of the treatment, and the patient right now is only on levothyroxine replacement, except all his hormonal excess came back to normal. Before moving on to the discussion, I would like to share some articles on the granulomatous hypophysitis of the pituitary gland or the pituitary tuberculosis. Moving on, the tuberculosis involvement of the pituitary gland is an uncommon case of secondary granulomatous hypophysitis that may mimic pituitary adenoma or idiopathic granulomatous hypophysitis on imaging. Clinical suspicion is warranted in TB endemic settings when cellular mass is present with headache, visual symptoms, diabetes insipidus, or progressive hypopituitarism. Overall, hypophysitis is very rare. Estimated incidence is 1 per 7 to 9 million per year and accounts for 0.4% of pituitary surgeries. Pituitary tuberculosis is extremely rare. A literature review reviewing cases reported between 1924 to 2009, almost a century, found only 100 to 110 published cases of pituitary tuberculosis. Intracranial tuberculomas themselves comprise of 0.15 to 5% of intracranial space occupying lesions, and pituitary location is an unusual site within that group. In TB endemic areas, it is very crucial to include pituitary TB in differentials of the cellular masses. A negative microbiology like AFB stain does not exclude TB, and we should rely on a combination of imaging, histology, PCR, and clinical response to the ATT. Early diagnosis and initiation of ATT are crucial as they lead to complete reversal of the pan-hypopituitarism. Also, to emphasize, the non-specific radiological findings challenge the pre-operative diagnosis of pituitary tuberculosis, as most pituitary hypophysitis are misdiagnosed as adenomas, and after the surgical excision, they are diagnosed as hypophysitis when the histological studies are made. However, a high clinical suspicion in endemic regions can minimize unnecessary invasive procedures and surgical interventions. Also, for this patient, he went to multiple tertiary care centers in Jaipur itself and was diagnosed as adenoma of the pituitary gland in the MRI reports and was planned for surgical removal. Here we can see, after the consent of the patient, the current status of the patient as told by his attender.
मैं अपने बेटी की बीमारी के लिए बहुत परेशान था, उनको दिमाग में ट्यूमर ऐसा कुछ बताया था। हम 3-4 हॉस्पिटलों में गए जयपुर के, फिर उसके बाद हम महावीर महात्मा हॉस्पिटल गए, वहाँ पे डॉक्टर मिश्रा और डॉक्टर कासर साहब ने उसका इलाज किया और आज वो पूर्ण रूप से स्वस्थ है और पेशेंट आराम से कर रहा है और एक कहीं टेक्नोलॉजी की गोली खाता है। मैं बहुत प्रोग्राम हमारे डॉक्टर और हमारे डॉक्टर साहब का उसको अच्छी तरह से जीवन यापन करने के हिसाब से से उसको रोकने लगी है उसका
So the main thing to notice after the CCR is that we prevented surgical intervention of the patient and managing the patient conservatively. A vote of thanks to the MJMST Management, CCR Committee, Department of Endocrinology, Ophthalmology, Radiology, Neurology, Neurosurgery and Nuclear Medicine, Department of Pathology and the patient family for the trust they had in us and for providing us with all the lost records. Thank you.